The story of the supreme truth, the Apannaka Jataka. This discourse regarding truth was delivered by the Blessed One while he was dwelling in the great monastery at Devadhamma near Sukhavihari. But who, you ask, was it that led up to this tale? Well, it was the treasurer's 500 friends, disciples of the sophists. For one day, Apannaka, the treasurer, took his friends, the 500 disciples of other schools, and went off with them to Devadhamma, whither also he had a great store brought of garlands, perfumes, and unguents, together with oil, honey, molasses, cloths, and cloaks. After due salutation to the Blessed One, he made his offering to him of the garlands and the like, and handed over to the order of the brethren the medicinal oil and so forth together with the cloths. And, this done, he took his seat on one side, eschewing the 6 faults and sitting down. Likewise, those disciples of other schools saluted the Buddha, and took their seats close by the side of Apannaka, gazing upon the Master's countenance, glorious as the full moon, upon his excellent presence endowed with the signs and marks of Buddhahood, and encompassed to a fathom's length with light, and upon the rich glory that marks a Buddha, a glory which issued, as it were, in paired garlands, pair upon pair. Then, though in thunderous tones as of a young lion roaring in the red valley, or as of a storm cloud in the rainy season, bringing down as it were the Ganges of the heavens, and seeming to weave a chaplet of jewels, yet in a voice of 8-fold perfection, the charm of which ravished the ear, he preached to them the truth in a discourse full of sweetness and bright with varied beauty. They, after hearing the Master's discourse, rose up with hearts converted, and with due salutation to the Lord of Knowledge, burst asunder the other doctrines in which they had taken refuge, and betook themselves to the Buddha as their refuge. Thenceforth, without ceasing, they used to go with Apannaka, carrying in their hands perfumes and garlands and the like, to hear the truth in the monastery. And they abounded in charity, kept the commandments, and kept the weekly fast day. Now the Blessed One went from Sukhavihari back to Rajagaha again. As soon as the Buddha had gone, they burst asunder their new faith, and returning to the other doctrines as their refuge, reverted to their original state. After some 7 or 8 months' stay, the Blessed One came back to Devadhamma. Once again too did Apannaka come with those friends of his to the Master, make his salutation and offering of perfumes and the like, and take his seat on one side. And the friends also saluted the Blessed One, and took their seats in like manner. Then did Apannaka tell the Blessed One how, when the Buddha had departed on his alms pilgrimage, his friends had forsaken their refuge for the old doctrines again, and had reverted to their original state. Opening the lotus of his mouth, as though it were a casket of jewels, scented with scents divine and filled with diverse perfumes by virtue of his having ever spoken aright throughout myriad aeons, the Blessed One made his sweet voice come forth, as he inquired, "Is the report true that you, disciples, have forsaken the 3 refuges for the refuge of other doctrines?" And when they, unable to conceal the fact, had confessed, saying, "It is true, Blessed One," then said the Master, "Disciples, not between the bounds of hell below and the highest heaven above, not in all the infinite worlds that stretch right and left, is there the equal, much less the superior of a Buddha in the excellences which spring from obeying the commandments and from other virtuous conduct." Then he declared to them the excellences of the 3 gems as they are revealed in the sacred texts, the following amongst the number: "Of all creatures, brethren, whether footless, etc., of these the Buddha is the chief. Whatsoever riches there be in this or in other worlds, etc. And verily the chief of the faithful, etc." Thence he went on to say, "No disciples, male or female, who seek refuge in the 3 gems that are endowed with such peerless excellences, are ever reborn into hell and the like states, but, released from all rebirth into states of suffering, they pass to the realm of devas and there receive great glory. Therefore, in forsaking such a refuge for that offered by other doctrines, you have gone astray. And here the following sacred texts should be cited to make it clear that none who, to find release in the supreme good, have sought refuge in the three gems, shall be reborn into states of suffering. Those who have refuge in the Buddha found shall not pass hence to states of suffering. Straightway, when they shall quit their human frame, a deva form these faithful ones shall fill. Those who have refuge in the doctrine found, etc., etc. Those who have refuge in the order found, etc., etc. They're manifold, the refuges men seek, the mountain peak, the forest solitude, and so on down to, when he this refuge shall have sought and found. Entire release is his from every pain. But the Master did not end his teaching to them at this point, for he went on to say, Disciples, meditation on the thought of the Buddha, meditation on the thought of the truth, meditation on the thought of the brotherhood. This it is that gives entry to and fruition of the first, the second, the third, and the fourth paths to bliss. And when he had preached the truth to them in these and other ways, he said, In forsaking such a refuge as this, you have gone astray. And here the gift of the several paths to those who meditate on the thought of the Buddha and so forth should be made clear by scriptures as the following. One thing there is, brethren, which, if practiced and developed, conduces to utter loathing of the world's vanities, to the cessation of passion, to the end of being, to peace, to insight, to enlightenment, to nirvana. What is this one thing? The meditation on the thought of the Buddha. When he had thus exhorted the disciples, the Blessed One said, So too in times past, disciples, the men who jumped to the fatuous conclusion that what was no refuge was a real refuge, fell a prey to goblins in a demon-haunted wilderness and were utterly destroyed, whilst the men who clave to the absolute and indisputable truth, prospered in the selfsame wilderness. And when he had said this, he became silent. Then, rising up from his seat, and saluting the Blessed One, the layman Anathapindika burst into praises, and with clasped hands raised in reverence to his forehead, spoke thus, It is clear to us, sir, that in these present days these disciples were led by error into forsaking the supreme refuge. But the bygone destruction of those opinionated ones in the demon-haunted wilderness and the prospering of the men who clave to the truth are hidden from us and known only to you. May it please the Blessed One, as though causing the full moon to rise in the sky, to make this thing clear to us. Then said the Blessed One, It was solely to brush away the world's difficulties that by the display of the 10 perfections through myriad aeons, I won omniscience. Give ear and hearken, as closely as if you were filling a tube of gold with lion's marrow. Having thus excited the treasurer's attention, he made clear the thing that rebirth had concealed from them, as though he were releasing the full moon from the upper air, the birthplace of the snows. Once on a time in the city of Benares in the Kasi country, there was a king named Brahmadatta. In those days, the Bodhisattva was born into a merchant's family, and growing up in due course, used to journey about trading with 500 carts, traveling now from east to west and now from west to east. There was also at Benares another young merchant, a stupid blockhead, lacking resource. Now, at the time of our story, the Bodhisattva had loaded 500 carts with costly wares of Benares and had got them all ready to start, and so had the foolish young merchant too. Thought the Bodhisattva, If this foolish young merchant keeps me company all along, and the 1,000 carts travel along together, it will be too much for the road. It will be a hard matter to get wood, water, and so forth for the men, or grass for the oxen. Either he or I must go on first." So he sent for the other and laid his view before him, saying, "The two of us can't travel together. Would you rather go first or last?" Thought the other, "There will be many advantages if I go on first. I shall have a road which is not yet cut up. My oxen will have the pick of the grass. My men will have the pick of the herbs for curry. The water will be undisturbed, and lastly I shall fix my own price for the barter of my goods." Accordingly, he replied, "I will go first, my dear sir." The Bodhisattva, on the other hand, saw many advantages in going last, for he argued thus to himself, "Those who go first will level the road where it is rough, whilst I shall travel along the road they have already traveled. Their oxen will have grazed off the coarse old grass, whilst mine will pasture on the sweet young growth which will spring up in its place. My men will find a fresh growth of sweet herbs for curry, where the old ones have been picked. Where there is no water, the first caravan will have to dig to supply themselves, and we shall drink at the wells they dug." Haggling over prices is killing work, whereas I, following later, shall barter my wares at the prices they have already fixed. Accordingly, seeing all these advantages, he said to the other, "Then go you first, my dear sir." "Very well, I will," said the foolish merchant, and he yoked his carts and set out. Journeying along, he left human habitations behind him and came to the outskirts of the wilderness. Now wildernesses are of the 5 following kinds: robber wildernesses, wild beast wildernesses, drought wildernesses, demon wildernesses, and famine wildernesses. The first is when the way is beset by robbers. The second is when the way is beset by lions and other wild beasts. The third is when there is no bathing or water to be got. The fourth is when the road is beset by demons. And the fifth is when no roots or other food are to be found. And in this 5-fold category, the wilderness in question was both a drought and a demon wilderness. Accordingly, this young merchant took great big water jars on his carts, and filling them with water, set out to cross the 60 leagues of desert which lay before him. Now, when he had reached the middle of the wilderness, the goblin who haunted it said to himself, "I will make these men throw away their stock of water, and devour them all when they are faint." So he framed by his magic power a delightful carriage drawn by pure white young bulls. With a retinue of some 10 or 12 goblins bearing bows and quivers, swords and shields, he rode along to meet them like a mighty lord in this carriage, with blue lotuses and white water lilies wreathed round his head, with wet hair and wet clothes, and with muddy carriage wheels. His attendants, too, in front and rear of him went along with their hair and clothes wet, with garlands of blue lotuses and white water lilies on their beads, and with bunches of white lotuses in their hands, chewing the esculent stalks and dripping with water and mire. Now the leaders of caravans have the following custom. Whenever the wind blows in their teeth, they ride on in front in their carriage with their attendants round them, in order to escape the dust. But when the wind blows from behind them, then they ride in like fashion in the rear of the column. And, as on this occasion the wind was blowing against them, the young merchant was riding in front. When the goblin became aware of the merchant's approach, he drew his carriage aside from the track and greeted him kindly, asking him whither he was going. The leader of the caravan, too, caused his carriage to be drawn aside from the track so as to let the carts pass by, whilst he stayed by the way and thus addressed the goblin. "We are just on our way from Benares, sir. But I observe that you have lotuses and water lilies on your heads and in your hands, and that your people are chewing the esculent stalks, and that you are all muddy and dripping with wet. Pray, did it rain while you were on the road? And did you come on pools covered with lotuses and water lilies?" Hereon the goblin exclaimed, "What did you say?" "Why, yonder appears the dark green streak of the forest, and thence onward there is nothing but water all through the forest. It is always raining there, the pools are full, and on every side are lakes covered with lotuses and water lilies." Then, as the line of carts passed by, he asked where they were bound for. "To such and such a place," was the reply. "And what wares have you got in this cart and in this?" "So and so." "And what might you have in this last cart, which seems to move as if it were heavily laden?" "Oh, there's water in that." "You did well to carry water with you from the other side, but there is no need for it now, as water is abundant on ahead. So break the jars and throw the water away, that you may travel easier." And he added, "Now continue on your way, as we have stopped too long already." Then he went a little way further on, till he was out of sight, when he made his way back to the goblin city where he dwelt. Such was the folly of that foolish merchant that he did the goblin's bidding, and had his jars broken and the water all thrown away, without saving so much even as would go in the palm of a man's hand. Then he ordered the carts to drive on. Not a drop of water did they find on. Ahead and thirst exhausted the men. All day long, till the sun went down, they kept on the march. But at sunset they unyoked their carts and made a lager, tethering the oxen to the wheels. The oxen had no water to drink, and the men none to cook their rice with, and the tired-out band sank to the ground to slumber. But as soon as night fell, the goblins came out from their city and slew every single one of those men and oxen. And when they had devoured their flesh, leaving only the bare bones, the goblins departed. Thus was the foolish young merchant the sole cause of the destruction of that whole band, whose skeletons were strewn in every conceivable direction, whilst the 500 carts stood there with their loads untouched. Now the Bodhisattva allowed some 6 weeks to pass by after the starting of the foolish young merchant before he set out. Then he proceeded from the city with his 500 carts, and in due course came to the outskirts of the wilderness. Here he had his water jars filled and inlaid in an ample stock of water, and by beat of drum he had his men assembled in camp, and thus addressed them: "Let not so much as a palmful of water be used without my sanction. There are poison trees in this wilderness, so let no man among you eat any leaf, flower, or fruit which he has not eaten before, without first asking me." With this exhortation to his men, he pushed on into the wilderness with his 500 carts. When he had reached the middle of the wilderness, the goblin made his appearance on the Bodhisattva's path as in the former case. But as soon as he became aware of the goblin, the Bodhisattva saw through him, for he thought to himself, "There's no water here in this waterless desert. This person with his red eyes and aggressive bearing casts no shadow. Very likely he has induced the foolish young merchant who preceded me to throw away all his water, and then, waiting till they were worn out, has eaten up the merchant with all his men. But he doesn't know my cleverness and ready wit." Then he shouted to the goblin, "Begone! We're men of business, and do not throw away what water we have got before we see where more is to come from. But when we do see more, we may be trusted to throw this water away and lighten our carts." The goblin rode on a bit further till he was out of sight, and then betook himself back to his home in the demon city. But when the goblin had gone, the Bodhisattva's men said to him, "Sir, we heard from those men that yonder is the dark green streak of the forest appearing, where they said it was always raining. They had got lotuses on their heads and water lilies in their hands, and were eating the stalks, whilst their clothes and hair were wringing wet with water streaming off them. Let us throw away our water, and get on a bit quicker with lightened carts." On hearing these words, the Bodhisattva ordered a halt and had the men all mustered. "Tell me," said he, "did any man among you ever hear before today that there was a lake or a pool in this wilderness?" "No, sir," was the answer. "Why, it's known as the waterless desert. We have just been told by some people that it is raining just on ahead in the belt of forest." "Now how far does a rain wind carry?" "A league, sir." "And has this rain wind reached any one man here?" "No, sir." "How far off can you see the crest of a storm cloud?" "A league, sir." "And has any one man here seen the top of even a single storm cloud?" "How far off can you see a flash of lightning?" 4 or 5 leagues, sir." "And has any one man here seen a flash of lightning?" "No, sir." "How far off can a man hear a peal of thunder?" 2 or 3 leagues, sir." "And has any man here heard a peal of thunder?" "No, sir." "These are not men but goblins. They will return in the hope of devouring us when we are weak and faint after throwing away our water at their bidding." As the young merchant who went on before us was not a man of resource, most likely he has been fooled into throwing his water away and has been devoured when exhaustion ensued. We may expect to find his 500 carts standing just as they were loaded for the start. We shall come on them today. Press on with all possible speed without throwing away a drop of water. Urging his men forward with these words, he proceeded on his way till he came upon the 500 carts standing just as they had been loaded, and the skeletons of the men and oxen lying strewn in every direction. He had his carts unyoked and ranged in a circle so as to form a strong laager. He saw that his men and oxen had their supper early, and that the oxen were made to lie down in the middle with the men round them. And he himself with the leading men of his band stood on guard, sword in hand, through the 3 watches of the night, waiting for the day to dawn. With it, on the morrow at daybreak, when he had had his oxen fed and everything needful done, he discarded his own weak carts for stronger ones, and his own common goods for the most costly of the derelict goods. Then he went on to his destination, where he bartered his stock for wares of 2 or 3 times their value, and came back to his own city without losing a single man out of all his company. This story ended. The master said, "Thus it was, layman, that in times past the fatuous came to utter destruction, whilst those who clave to the truth, escaping from the demon's hands, reached their goal in safety and came back to their homes again." And when he had thus linked the 2 stories together, he, as the Buddha, spoke the following stanza for the purposes of this lesson on the truth. Then some declared the soul, the peerless truth, but otherwise the false logicians spake. Let him that's wise from this a lesson take, and firmly grasp the soul, the peerless truth. Thus did the Blessed One teach this lesson respecting truth. And he went on to say, what is called walking by truth not only bestows the 3 happy endowments, the 6 heavens of the realms of sense, and the endowments of the higher realm of Brahma, but finally is the giver of arahatship. Whilst what is called walking by untruth entails rebirth in the 4 states of punishment or in the lowest castes of mankind. Further, the Master went on to expound in 16 ways the 4 truths, at the close of which all those 500 disciples were established in the fruit of the first path. Having delivered his lesson and his teaching, and having told the 2 stories and established the connection linking them together, the Master concluded by identifying the birth as follows. Devadatta was the foolish young merchant of those days. His followers were the followers of that merchant. The followers of the Buddha were the followers of the wise merchant, who was myself. The story of Elder Sukhavihari, Sukhavihari Jataka. The Bodhisattva was once an ascetic who had many followers studying with him in the Himalayas. One rainy season, when his group went to stay in the city, they resided in the royal park and were taken care of by the king. When the rains had ceased and it was time to return to the wilderness, the Bodhisattva, having grown quite old, bid his disciples farewell and remained behind to live out his final days in the city. One day the eldest of the ascetics, who had been a king before pursuing a religious life, returned to the city to visit the Bodhisattva. While the two talked, the king arrived to see the Bodhisattva. The other ascetic did not rise when the king entered. He just lay on his mat uttering, "Oh, happiness, oh happiness." The king criticized him for this disrespect, but the Bodhisattva explained that this ascetic was also once a king. And now, unrestrained by his former life of luxury, with royal pomp and armed guards around him at all times, he had true happiness that only insight can provide. He was free from being a slave to lust. The king listened to the Bodhisattva's lesson and returned to his palace with new understanding. The disciple who visited the Bodhisattva in the city was an earlier birth of one of the Buddha's disciples who had been a king before ordaining. In his royal days, he lived in a perpetual state of fear, even while in his private chambers deep inside the palace, despite being constantly surrounded by guards. Now, as an arahant, he roamed widely through dangerous wilderness with no fear. Thinking back to his past, he felt overwhelming joy and exclaimed, "Oh, happiness! Oh, happiness!" Some other disciples overheard him saying this and mentioned it to the Buddha. The Buddha told them this story so they knew that it was not the first time this disciple had been filled with happiness after adopting a religious life. The moral of the story: true happiness is not found in wealth, power, or royal palaces, but in a peaceful heart free from attachment. The former king, once trapped in fear and desire, found real joy only after renouncing worldly luxuries. When the mind is unburdened, there is no fear, no suffering, only deep contentment. Like a lotus rising above muddy waters, the awakened one lives untouched by worldly concerns. True security is not in guards and riches, but in inner wisdom and detachment. To walk the path of peace, we must let go of illusions, embrace simplicity, and see clearly that freedom lies within. The story of King Makhadeva. Once on a time in Mithila in the realm of Videha, there was a king named Makhadeva, who was righteous and ruled righteously. For successive periods of 84,000 years, he had respectively amused himself as prince, ruled as viceroy, and reigned as king. All these long years had he lived, when one day he said to his barber, "Tell me, friend barber, when you see any gray hairs in my head." So one day, years and years after, the barber did find among the raven locks of the king a single gray hair. And he told the king so. "Pull it out, my friend," said the king, "and lay it in my palm." The barber accordingly plucked the hair out with his golden tongues and laid it in the king's hand. The king had at that time still 84,000 years more to live. But nevertheless, at the sight of that one gray hair, he was filled with deep emotion. He seemed to see the king of death standing over him, or to be cooped within a blazing butt of leaves. "Foolish Makhadeva," he cried, "gray hairs have come upon you before you have been able to rid yourself of depravities." And as he thought and thought about the appearance of his gray hair, he grew aflame within. The sweat rolled down from his body, whilst his raiment oppressed him and seemed intolerable. "This very day," thought he, "will I renounce the world for the brother's life." To his barber he gave the grant of a village, which yielded 100,000 pieces of money. He sent for his eldest son and said to him, "My son, gray hairs are come upon me. and I am become old. I have had my fill of human joys, and fain would taste the joys divine. The time for my renunciation has come. Take the sovereignty upon yourself. As for me, I will take up my abode in the pleasaunce called Makhadeva's mango grove, and there tread the ascetic's path. As he was thus bent on leading the brother's life, his ministers drew near and said, "What is the reason, sire, why you adopt the brother's life?" Taking the gray hair in his hand, the king repeated this stanza as ministers. "Lo, these gray hairs that on my head appear are death's own messengers that come to rob my life. 'Tis time I turned from worldly things, and in the hermit's path sought saving peace." And after these words, he renounced his sovereignty that self-same day, and became a recluse. Dwelling in that very mango grove of Makhadeva, he there during 84,000 years fostered the four perfect states within himself, and, dying with insight full and unbroken, was reborn in the realm of Brahma. Passing thence, he became a king again in Mithila, under the name of Nimi, and after uniting his scattered family, once more became a hermit in that same mango grove, winning the four perfect states, and passing thence once more to the realm of Brahma. After repeating his statement that he had similarly renounced the world in bygone days, the Buddha at the end of his lesson preached the four truths. Some entered the first path, some the second, and some the third. Having told the two stories, the master shewed the connection between them and identified the birth by saying, "In those days Ananda was the barber, Rahula the sun, and I myself, King Makhadeva." The moral of the story: life is impermanent. Even a mighty king cannot escape aging and death. When King Makhadeva saw his first gray hair, he realized that all worldly power and pleasure are temporary. Instead of clinging to his throne, he chose the path of wisdom and renunciation. This story teaches the Buddhist principle of impermanence, anicca, that everything changes and nothing lasts forever. True peace does not come from wealth or status, but from inner awakening. By letting go of attachment and seeking wisdom, we can find true liberation and lasting happiness. Reflect on your own life. What are you holding on to that is impermanent? How can you cultivate inner peace and wisdom today? The story of the little millionaire, Cullaka-Setthi Jataka. With humblest start. This story was told by the master about the elder named Little Wayman, while in Jivaka's mango grove near Rajagaha, and here an account of Little Wayman's birth must be given. Tradition tells us that the daughter of a rich merchant's family in Rajagaha actually stooped to intimacy with a slave. Becoming alarmed lest her misconduct should get known, she said to the slave, "We can't live on here, for if my mother and father come to know of this sin of ours, they will tear us limb from limb. Let us go and live afar off." So with their belongings in their hands, they stole together out by the hardly open door and fled away. They cared not whither to find a shelter beyond the ken of her family. Then they went and lived together in a certain place, with the result that she conceived. And when her full time was nearly come, she told her husband and said, "If I am taken in labor, away from kith and kin, that will be a trouble to both of us. So let us go home." First he agreed to start today, and then he put it off till the morrow. And so he let the days slip by, till she thought to herself, "This fool is so conscious of his great offense that he dares not go. One's parents are one's best friends, so whether he goes or stays, I must go." So, when he went out, she put all her household matters in order and set off home, telling her next-door neighbor where she was going. Returning home, and not finding his wife, but discovering from the neighbors that she had started off home, He hurried after her and came up with her on the road, and then and there she was taken in labor. "What's this, my dear?" said he. "I have given birth to a son, my husband," said she. Accordingly, as the very thing had now happened which was the only reason for the journey, they both agreed that it was no good going on now, and so turned back again. And as their child had been born by the way, they called him Wayman. Not long after, she became with child again, and everything fell out as before. And as this second child too was born by the way, they called him Wayman too, distinguishing the elder as Great Wayman and the younger as Little Wayman. Then, with both their children, they again went back to their own home. Now, as they were living there, their way child heard other boys talking of their uncles and grandfathers and grandmothers. So he asked his mother whether he hadn't got relations like the other boys. "Oh yes, my dear," said his mother, "but they don't live here. Your grandfather is a wealthy merchant in the city of Rajagaha, and you have plenty of relations there." "Why don't we go there, mother?" She told the boy the reason why they stayed away, but as the children kept on speaking about these relations, she said to her husband, "The children are always plaguing me. Are my parents going to eat us at sight? Come, let us shew the children their grandfather's family." "Well, I don't mind taking them there, but I really could not face your parents. All right, so long as, some way or other, the children come to see their grandfather's family," said she. So those two took their children and, coming in due course to Rajagaha, put up in a public rest house by the city gate. Then, taking with them the two children, the woman caused their coming to be made known to her parents. The latter, on hearing the message, returned this answer: "True. It is strange to be without children unless one has renounced the world in quest of arahatship. Still, so great is the guilt of the pair towards us that they may not stand in our sight. Here is a sum of money for them. Let them take this and retire to live where they will, but the children they may send here." Then the merchant's daughter took the money so sent her and dispatched the children by the messengers. So the children grew up in their grandfather's house, Little Wayman being of tender years, while Great Wayman used to go with his grandfather to hear the Buddha preach the truth. And by constant hearing of the truth from the master's own lips, the lad's heart yearned to renounce the world for the life of a brother. "With your permission," said he to his grandfather, "I should like to join the brotherhood." "What do I hear?" cried the old man. "Why, it would give me greater joy to see you join the order than to see the whole world join. Become a brother, if you feel able." And he took him to the master. "Well, merchant," said the master, "have you brought your boy with you?" "Yes, sir. This is my grandson, who wishes to join your brotherhood." Then the master sent for a mendicant and told him to admit the lad to the order. And the mendicant repeated the formula of the perishable body and admitted the lad as a novice. When the latter had learned by heart many words of the Buddha and was old enough, he was admitted a full brother. He now gave himself up to earnest thought till he won arahatship, and as he passed his days in the enjoyment of insight and the paths, he thought whether he could not impart the like happiness to Little Wayman. So he went to his grandfather, the merchant, and said, "Great merchant, with your consent, I will admit Little Wayman to the order." "Pray do so, reverend sir," was the reply. Then the elder admitted the lad Little Wayman and established him in the 10 Commandments. But Little Wayman proved a dullard. With 4 months' study, he failed to get by heart this single stanza. "Lo, like a fragrant lotus at the dawn of day, full blown with virgin wealth of scent, Behold the Buddha's glory shining forth, as in the vaulted heaven beams the sun. 4. We are told, in the Buddhahood of Kassapa, this little Wayman, having himself attained to knowledge as a brother, laughed to scorn a dull brother who was learning a passage by heart. His scorn so confused his butt that the latter could not learn or recite the passage. And now, in consequence, on joining the brotherhood, he himself proved a dullard. Each new line he learned drove the last out of his memory, and 4 months slipped away while he was struggling with this single stanza. Said his elder brother to him, "Wayman, you are not equal to receiving this doctrine. In 4 whole months you have been unable to learn a single stanza. How then can you hope to crown your vocation with supreme success? Leave the monastery." But, though thus expelled by his brother, little Wayman was so attached to the Buddha's creed that he did not want to become a layman. Now at that time, great Wayman was acting as steward, and Jivaka Komarabaka, going to his mango grove with a large present of perfumes and flowers for the master, had presented his offering and listened to a discourse. Then, rising from his seat and bowing to the Buddha, he went up to great Wayman and asked, "How many brethren are there, Reverend Sir?" "With the master?" "Just 500, sir." "Will you bring the 500 brethren with the Buddha at their head to take their meal at my house tomorrow?" "Lay disciple, one of them named Little Wayman is a dullard and makes no progress in the faith," said the elder. "I accept the invitation for everyone but him." Hearing this, little Wayman thought to himself, "In accepting the invitation for all these brethren, the elder carefully accepts so as to exclude me. This proves that my brother's affection for me is dead. What have I to do with this? I will become a layman and live in the exercise of charity and other good works of a lay character." And on the morrow early he went forth, avowedly to become a layman again. Now at the first break of day, as he was surveying the world, the master became aware of this, and going forth even earlier than little Wayman, he paced to and fro by the porch on little Wayman's road. As the latter came out of the house, he observed the master, and with a salutation went up to him. "Whither away at this hour?" "Little Wayman," said the master. "My brother has expelled me from the order, sir, and I am going to wander forth." "Little Wayman, as it was under me that you took the vows, why did you not, when expelled by your brother, come to me?" "Conte, what have you to do with a layman's life? You shall stop with me." So saying, he took little Wayman and seated him at the door of his own perfumed chamber. Then, giving him a perfectly clean cloth, which he had supernaturally created, the master said, "Face towards the east, and as you handle this cloth, repeat these words, 'Removal of impurity, removal of impurity.'" Then at the time appointed the master, attended by the brotherhood, went to Jivaka's house and sat down on the seat set for him. Now little Wayman, with his gaze fixed on the sun, sat handling the cloth and repeating the words, "Removal of impurity, removal of impurity." And as he kept handling the piece of cloth, it grew soiled. Then he thought, "Just now this piece of cloth was quite clean, but my personality has destroyed its original state and made it dirty." Impermanent indeed are all compounded things, and even as he realized death and decay, he won the Arahat's illumination. Knowing that little Wayman's mind had won illumination, the master sent forth an apparition, and in this semblance of himself appeared before him, as if seated in front of him, and saying, "Heed it not, little Wayman, that this mere piece of cloth has become dirty and stained with impurity. With me are the impurities of lust and other evil things. Remove them." And the apparition uttered these stanzas. Impurity in lust consists not dirt, and lust we term the real impurity. Yea, brethren, whoso drives it from his breast, he lives the gospel of the purified. Impurity in wrath consists not dirt, and wrath we term the real impurity. Yea, brethren, whoso drives it from his breast, he lives the gospel of the purified. Delusion is impurity, not dirt. We term delusion real impurity. Yea, brethren, whoso drives it from his breast, he lives the gospel of the purified. At the close of these stanzas, little Wayman attained to arahatship with the 4 branches of knowledge, whereby he straightway came to have knowledge of all the sacred texts. Tradition has it that, in ages past, when he was a king and was making a solemn procession round his city, he wiped the sweat from his brow with a spotless cloth which he was wearing, and the cloth was stained. Thought he, "It is this body of mine which has destroyed the original purity and whiteness of the cloth, and dirtied it. Impermanent indeed are all composite things." Thus he grasped the idea of impermanence, and hence it came to pass that it was the removal of impurity which worked his salvation. Meantime, Jivaka Komarabaka offered the water of donation, but the master put his hand over the vessel, saying, "Are there no brethren, Jivaka, in the monastery?" Said Great Wayman, "There are no brethren there, reverend sir." "Oh yes, Puya, there are, Jivaka," said the master. "Hi, there," said Jivaka to a servant. "Just you go and see whether or not there are any brethren in the monastery." At that moment little Wayman, conscious as he was that his brother was declaring there were no brethren in the monastery, determined to shew him there were, and so filled the whole mango grove with nothing but brothers. Some were making robes, others dyeing, whilst others again were repeating the sacred texts. Each of 1,000 brethren he made unlike all the others. Finding this host of brethren in the monastery, the man returned and said that the whole mango grove was full of brethren. But as regards the elder up in the monastery, Wayman, 1,000-fold self-multiplied, sat on, till bidden, in that pleasant grove. "Now go back," said the master to the man, "and say, the master sends for him whose name is little Wayman." But when the man went and delivered his message, 1,000 mouths answered, "I am little Wayman. I am little Wayman." Back came the man with the report. "They all say they are little Wayman, reverend sir." "Well, now go back, said the master, "and take by the hand the first one of them who says he is little Wayman, and the others will all vanish." The man did as he was bidden, and straightway the 1,000 brethren vanished from sight. The elder came back with the man. When the meal was over, the master said, "Jivaka, take little Wayman's bowl. He will return thanks." Jivaka did so. Then, like a young lion roaring defiance, the elder ranged the whole of the sacred texts through in his address of thanks. Lastly, the master rose from his seat and, attended by the order, returned to the monastery. And there, after the assignment of tasks by the brotherhood, he rose from his seat and, standing in the doorway of his perfumed chamber, delivered a Buddha discourse to the brotherhood. Ending with a theme which he gave out for meditation, and dismissing the brotherhood, he retired into his perfumed chamber and lay down lion-like on his right side to rest. At even, the orange-robed brethren assembled together from all sides in the Hall of Truth and sang the Master's praises, even as though they were spreading a curtain of orange cloth round him as they sat. Brethren, Great Wayman failed to recognize the bent of little Wayman, and expelled him from the monastery as a dullard who could not even learn a single stanza in 4 whole months. But the all-knowing Buddha, by his supremacy and the truth, bestowed on him arahatship with all its supernatural knowledge, even while a single meal was in progress. and by that knowledge he grasped the whole of the sacred texts. Oh, how great is a Buddha's power! Now the Blessed One, knowing full well the talk that was going on in the Hall of Truth, thought it meet to go there. So, rising from his Buddha couch, he donned his 2 orange undercloths, girded himself as with lightning, arrayed himself in his orange-colored robe, the ample robe of a Buddha, and came forth to the Hall of Truth with the infinite grace of a Buddha, moving with the royal gait of an elephant in the plenitude of his vigor. Ascending the glorious Buddha throne set in the midst of the resplendent hall, he seated himself upon the middle of the throne, emitting those 6-colored rays which mark a Buddha, like the newly arisen sun, when from the peaks of the Yugandhara mountains he illumines the depths of the ocean. Immediately, the all-knowing one came into the hall. The brotherhood broke off their talk and were silent. Gazing round on the company with gentle, loving kindness, the master thought within himself, "This company is perfect. Not a man is guilty of moving hand or foot improperly. Not a sound, not a cough or sneeze is to be heard. In their reverence and awe of the majesty and glory of the Buddha, not a man would dare to speak before I did. Even if I sat here in silence all my life long, but it is my part to begin, and I will open the conversation." Then in his sweet divine tones he addressed the brethren and said, "What, pray, is the theme of this conclave? And what was the talk which was broken off?" "Sir," said they, "it was no profitless theme, but your own praises that we were telling here in conclave." And when they had told him word for word what they had been saying, the master said, "Brethren, through me, little Wayman has just now risen to great things in the faith. In times past it was to great things in the way of wealth that he rose, but equally through me." The brethren asked the master to explain this, and the Blessed One made clear in these words a thing which succeeding existences had hidden from them. Once on a time, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares in Kasi, the Bodhisattva was born into the treasurer's family, and growing up, was made treasurer, being called Treasurer Little. A wise and clever man was he, with a keen eye for signs and omens. One day on his way to wait upon the king, he came on a dead mouse lying on the road, and, taking note of the position of the stars at that moment, he said, "Any decent young fellow with his wits about him has only to pick that mouse up, and he might start a business and keep a wife." His words were overheard by a young man of good family but reduced circumstances, who said to himself, "That's a man who has always got a reason for what he says." And accordingly, he picked up the mouse, which he sold for a farthing at a tavern for their cat. With the farthing he got molasses and took drinking water in a water pot. Coming on flower gatherers returning from the forest, he gave each a tiny quantity of the molasses and ladled the water out to them. Each of them gave him a handful of flowers, with the proceeds of which, next day, he came back again to the flower grounds, provided with more molasses and a pot of water. That day the flower gatherers, before they went, gave him flowering plants with half the flowers left on them, and thus in a little while he obtained 8 pennies. Later, one rainy and windy day, the wind blew down a quantity of rotten branches and boughs and leaves in the king's pleasaunce, and the gardener did not see how to clear them away. Then up came the young man with an offer to remove the lot, if the wood and leaves might be his. The gardener closed with the offer on the spot. Then this apt pupil of Treasurer Little repaired to the children's playground, and in a very little while had got them by bribes of molasses to collect every stick and leaf in the place into a heap at the entrance to the pleasaunce. Just then the king's potter was on the lookout for fuel to fire bowls for the palace, and coming on this heap, took the lot off his hands. The sale of his wood brought in 16 pennies to this pupil of treasurer Little, as well as 5 bowls and other vessels. Having now 24 pennies in all, a plan occurred to him. He went to the vicinity of the city gate with a jar full of water and supplied 500 mowers with water to drink. Said they, "You've done us a good turn, friend. What can we do for you?" "Oh, I'll tell you when I want your aid," said he. And as he went about, he struck up an intimacy with a land trader and a sea trader. Said the former to him, "Tomorrow there will come to town a horse dealer with 500 horses to sell." On hearing this piece of news, he said to the mowers, "I want each of you today to give me a bundle of grass and not to sell your own grass till mine is sold." "Certainly," said they, and delivered the 500 bundles of grass at his house. Unable to get grass for his horses elsewhere, the dealer purchased our friend's grass for 1,000 pieces. Only a few days later, his sea trading friend brought him news of the arrival of a large ship in port. And another plan struck him. He hired for 8 pence a well-appointed carriage, which plied for hire by the hour, and went in great style down to the port. Having bought the ship on credit and deposited his signet ring as security, he had a pavilion pitched hard by, and said to his people, as he took his seat inside, "When merchants are being shown in, let them be passed on by 3 successive ushers into my presence." Hearing that a ship had arrived in port, about 100 merchants came down to buy the cargo, only to be told that they could not have it, as a great merchant had already made a payment on account. So away they all went to the young man, and the footman duly announced them by 3 successive ushers, as had been arranged beforehand. Each man of the 100 severally gave him 1,000 pieces to buy a share in the ship, and then a further 1,000 each to buy him out altogether. So it was with 200,000 pieces that this pupil of treasurer Little returned to Benares. Actuated by a desire to show his gratitude, he went with 100,000 pieces to call on treasurer Little. "How did you come by all this wealth?" asked the treasurer. "In 4 short months, simply by following your advice," replied the young man, and he told him the whole story, starting with the dead mouse. Thought Lord High Treasurer Little, on hearing all this, "I must see that a young fellow of these parts does not fall into anybody else's hands." So he married him to his own grown-up daughter and settled all the family estates on the young man. And at the treasurer's death, he became treasurer in that city, and the Bodhisattva passed away to fare according to his deserts. His lesson ended, the Supreme Buddha, the all-knowing one himself, repeated this stanza, with humblest start and trifling capital. "A shrewd and able man will rise to wealth, e'en as his breath can nurse a tiny flame." Also the Blessed One said, "It is through me, brethren, that little Wayman has just now risen to great things in the faith, as in times past to great things in the way of wealth." His lesson thus finished, the master made the connection between the 2 stories he had told and identified the birth in these concluding words. Little Wayman was in those days the pupil of Treasurer Little, and I myself Lord High Treasurer Little. The story of the measure of rice, Tandulanali Jataka. At that time the Reverend Daba, the Malayan, was mancipal to the Brotherhood. When in the early morning, Daba was allotting the checks for rice. Sometimes it was choice rice and sometimes it was an inferior quality, which fell to the share of the elder Udai. On days when he received the inferior quality, he used to make a commotion in the check room by demanding, "Is Daba the only one who knows how to give out checks? Don't we know?" One day when he was making a commotion, they handed him the check basket, saying, "Here, you give the checks out yourself today." Thenceforth, it was Udai who gave out the checks to the Brotherhood. But, in his distribution, he could not tell the best from the inferior rice. Nor did he know what seniority was entitled to the best rice and what to the inferior. So too, when he was making out the roster, he had not an idea of the seniority of the brethren thereon. Consequently, when the brethren took up their places, he made a mark on the ground or on the wall to shew that one detachment stood here and another there. Next day there were fewer brethren of one grade and more of another in the check room. Where there were fewer, the mark was too low down. Where the number was greater, it was too high up. But Udai, quite ignorant of detachments, gave out the checks simply according to his old marks. Hence, the brethren said to him, "Friend Udai, the mark is too high up or too low down. The best rice is for those of such and such seniority, and the inferior quality for such and such others." But he put them back with the argument, "If this mark is where it is, what are you standing here for? Why am I to trust you? It's my mark, I trust." Then the boys and novices thrust him from the check room, crying, "Friend Udai the dullard, when you give out the checks, the brethren are docked of what they ought to get. You're not fit to give them out. Get you gone from here." Hereupon a great uproar arose in the check room. Hearing the noise, the master asked the elder Ananda, saying, "Ananda, there is a great uproar in the check room. What is the noise about?" The elder explained it all to the Buddha. "Ananda," said he, "this is not the only time when Udai by his stupidity has robbed others of their profit. He did just the same thing in bygone times too." The elder asked the Blessed One for an explanation, and the Blessed One made clear what had been concealed by rebirth. Once on a time, Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares in Kasi. In those days, our Bodhisattva was his valuer. He used to value horses, elephants, and the like, and jewels, gold, and the like, and he used to pay over to the owners of the goods the proper price, as he fixed it. But the king was greedy, and his greed suggested to him this thought: "This valuer with his style of valuing will soon exhaust all the riches in my house. I must get another valuer." Opening his window and looking out into his courtyard, he espied walking across a stupid, greedy hind in whom he saw a likely candidate for the post. So the king had the man sent for, and asked him whether he could do the work. "Oh yes," said the man, "and so, to safeguard the royal treasure." The stupid fellow was appointed valuer. After this, the fool, in valuing elephants and horses and the like, used to fix a price dictated by his own fancy, neglecting their true worth. But, as he was valuer, the price was what he said and no other. At that time there arrived from the north country a horse dealer with 500 horses. The king sent for his new valuer and bade him value the horses. And the price he set on the whole 500 horses was just one measure of rice, which he ordered to be paid over to the dealer, directing the horses to be led off to the stable. Away went the horse dealer to the old valuer, to whom he told what had happened and asked what was to be done. "Give him a bribe," said the ex-valuer, "and put this point to him. Knowing as we do that our horses are worth just a single measure of rice, we are curious to learn from you what the precise value of a measure of rice is. Could you state its value in the king's presence? If he says he can, then take him before the king, and I too will be there." Readily following the Bodhisattva's advice, the horse dealer bribed the man and put the question to him. The other, having expressed his ability to value a measure of rice, was promptly taken to the palace, whither also went the Bodhisattva and many other ministers. With due obeisance, the horse dealer said, "Sire, I do not dispute it that the price of 500 horses is a single measure of rice. But I would ask your majesty to question your valuer as to the value of that measure of rice." Ignorant of what had passed, the king said to the fellow, "Valuer, what are 500 horses worth?" "A measure of rice, sire," was the reply. "Very good, my friend. If 500 horses then are worth 1 measure of rice, what is that measure of rice worth?" "It is worth all Benares and its suburbs," was the fool's reply. Thus we learn that, having first valued the horses at a measure of hill paddy to please the king, he was bribed by the horse dealer to estimate that measure of rice at the worth of all Benares and its suburbs. And that though the walls of Benares were 12 leagues round by themselves, while the city and suburbs together were 300 leagues round, yet the fool priced all this vast city and its suburbs at a single measure of rice. Hereupon the ministers clapped their hands and laughed merrily. "We used to think," they said in scorn, "that the earth and the realm were beyond price. But now we learn that the kingdom of Benares, together with its king, is only worth a single measure of rice. What talents the valuer has! How has he retained his post so long? But truly, the valuer suits our king admirably." Then the Bodhisattva repeated this stanza: "Dost ask how much a peck of rice is worth? Why, all Benares, both within and out. Yet strange to tell, 500 horses too are worth precisely this same peck of rice." Thus, put to open shame, the king sent the fool packing and gave the Bodhisattva the office again. And when his life closed, the Bodhisattva passed away to fare according to his deserts. His lesson ended and the 2 stories told, the master made the connection linking both together and identified the birth by saying in conclusion, "Ujulurd was the stupid rustic valuer of those days, and I myself the wise valuer." The story of divine law, Devadhamma Jataka. Tradition tells us that, on the death of his wife, a squire of Savathi joined the brotherhood. When he was joining, he caused to be built for himself a chamber to live in, a room for the fire, and a storeroom. And not till he had stocked his storeroom with ghee and the rice did he finally join, even after he had become a brother. He used to send for his servants and make them cook him what he liked to eat. He was richly provided with the requisites, having an entire change of clothing for night and another for day, and he dwelt aloof on the outskirts of the monastery. One day, when he had taken out his cloths and bedding and had spread them out to dry in his chamber, a number of brethren from the country, who were on a pilgrimage from monastery to monastery, came in their journeying to his cell and found all these belongings. "Whose are these?" they asked. "Mine, sirs," he replied. "What, sir?" they cried. "This upper cloth and that as well, this undercloth as well as that, and that bedding too, is it all yours?" "Yes, nobody's but mine." "Sir," said they, "the Blessed One has only sanctioned 3 cloths, and yet, though the Buddha, to whose doctrine you have devoted yourself, is so simple in his wants, you forsooth have amassed all this stock of requisites. Come, we must take you before the Lord of Wisdom." And, so saying, they went off with him to the master. Becoming aware of their presence, the master said, "Wherefore is it, brethren, that you have brought the brother against his will?" "Sir, this brother is well off and has quite a stock of requisites." "Is it true, brother, as they say, that you are so well off?" "Yes, Blessed One." "But why, brother, have you amassed these belongings? Do not I extol the virtues of wanting little, contentment, and so forth, solitude, and determined resolve?" Angered by the master's words, he cried, Then I'll go about like this." And, flinging off his outer clothing, he stood in their midst clad only in his waistcloth. Then, as a moral support to him, the master said, "Was it not you, brother, who in bygone days were a seeker after the shamefacedness that fears to sin, and even when you were a water demon lived for 12 years seeking after that shamefacedness? So, how then comes it that, after vowing to follow the weighty doctrine of the Buddha, you have flung off your outer robes and stand here devoid of shame?" At the master's word, his sense of shame was restored. He donned his robes again, and saluting the master, seated himself at the side. The brethren, having asked the Blessed One to explain to them the matter he had mentioned, the Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from them by rebirth. Once on a time, Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares in Kasi. The Bodhisattva, having come to birth in those days as the king's son by the queen, was duly named Prince Mahimsasa. By the time he could run about, a second son was born to the king, and the name they gave this child was Prince Moon. But by the time he could run about, the Bodhisattva's mother died. Then the king took another queen, who was his joy and delight, and their love was crowned with the birth of yet another prince, whom they named Prince Sun. In his joy at the birth of the boy, the king promised to grant her any boon she might ask on the child's behalf. But the queen treasured up the promise to be fulfilled at her own good time hereafter. Later, when her son had grown up, she said to the king, "Sire, when my boy was born, you granted me a boon to ask for him. Let him be king." "Nay," said the king, "2 sons have I, radiant as flaming fires. I cannot give the kingdom to your son." But when he saw that, undaunted by this refusal, the queen kept plaguing him time after time to grant her request, the king, fearing lest the woman should plot evil against his sons, sent for them and said, "My children, when Prince Sun was born, I granted a boon, and now his mother wants the kingdom for him. I have no wish to give him the kingdom, but women are naturally wicked, and she will be plotting evil against you. You had better retire to the forest, to return at my death to rule in the city which belongs by right to our house." So saying, with tears and lamentations, the king kissed his 2 sons on the head and sent them forth. As the princes were leaving the palace after their adieu to their father, who should see them but Prince Sun himself, who was playing in the courtyard. And no sooner did he learn what was the matter than he made up his mind to go with his brothers, so he too went off in their company. The 3 came to the region of the Himalayas, and here the Bodhisattva, who had turned aside from the road and was sitting at the foot of a tree, said to Prince Sun, "Run down to the pool yonder, son dear, drink and bathe there, and then bring us too some water back in a lotus leaf." Now that pool had been delivered over to a certain water sprite by Vesavana, who said to him, "With the exception of such as know what is truly godlike, all that go down into this pool are yours to devour. Over those that do not enter the waters, you have no power granted to you." And thenceforth the water sprite used to ask all who went down into the pool what was truly godlike or mad, devouring everyone who did not know. Now it was into this pool that Prince Sun went down, quite unsuspiciously, with the result that he was seized by the water sprite, who said to him, "Do you know what is truly godlike?" "Oh yes," said he, "the sun and moon." "You don't know," said the monster, and hauling the prince down into the depths of the water, imprisoned him there in his own abode. Finding that his brother was a long time gone, the Bodhisattva sent Prince Moon. He too was seized by the water sprite and asked whether he knew what was truly godlike. "Oh yes, I know," said he, "the 4 quarters of heaven are." "You don't know," said the water sprite as he hauled this second victim off to the same prison house. Finding that this second brother too tarried long, the Bodhisattva felt sure that something had happened to them. So away he went after them and tracked their footsteps down into the water. Realizing at once that the pool must be the domain of a water sprite, he girded on his sword and took his bow in his hand and waited. Now, when the demon found that the Bodhisattva had no intention of entering the water, he assumed the shape of a forester, and in this guise addressed the Bodhisattva thus: "You're tired with your journey, mate. Why don't you go in and have a bathe and a drink, and deck yourself with lotuses? You would travel on comfortably afterwards." Recognizing him at once for a demon, the Bodhisattva said, "It is you who have seized my brothers." "Yes, it was the reply. "Why? Because all who go down into this pool belong to me." "What all?" "Not those who know what is truly godlike. All save these are mine." "And do you want to know the godlike?" "I do." "If this be so, I will tell you what is truly godlike." "Do so, and I will listen." "I should like to begin," said the Bodhisattva, "but I am travel-stained with my journey." Then the water sprite bathed the Bodhisattva and gave him food to eat and water to drink, decked him with flowers, sprinkled him with scents, and laid out a couch for him in the midst of a gorgeous pavilion. Seating himself on this couch and making the water sprite sit at his feet, the Bodhisattva said, "Listen then, and you shall hear what the truly godlike is." And he repeated this stanza: "Those only godlike call who shrink from sin, the white-souled tranquil votaries of good." And when the demon heard this, he was pleased, and said to the Bodhisattva, "Man of wisdom, I am pleased with you, and give you up one of your brothers. Which shall I bring?" "The youngest." "Man of wisdom, though you know so well what the truly godlike is, you don't act on your knowledge." "How so?" "Why, you take the younger in preference to the elder, without regard to his seniority." "Demon, I not only know but practice the godlike. It was on this boy's account that we sought refuge in the forest. It was for him that his mother asked the kingdom from our father, and our father, refusing to fulfill her demand, consented to our flight to the refuge of the forest. With us came this boy, nor ever thought of turning back again. Not a soul would believe me if I were to give out that he had been devoured by a demon in the forest. And it is the fear of odium that impels me to demand him at your hands." "Excellent, excellent, O man of wisdom," cried the demon in approval. "You not only know but practice the godlike." And in token of his pleasure and approval, he brought forth the two brothers and gave them both to the Bodhisattva. Then said the latter to the water sprite, "Friend, it is in consequence of your own evil deeds in times past that you have now been born a demon, subsisting on the flesh and blood of other living creatures. And in this present birth too, you are continuing to do evil. This evil conduct will forever bar you from escaping rebirth in hell and the other evil states. Wherefore, from this time forth, renounce evil and live virtuously." Having worked the demon's conversion, the Bodhisattva continued to dwell at that spot under his protection, until one day he read in the stars that his father was dead. Then, taking the water sprite with him, he returned to Benares and took possession of the kingdom, making Prince Moon his viceroy and Prince Sun his generalissimo. For the water sprite, he made a home in a pleasant spot, and took measures to ensure his being provided with the choicest garlands, flowers, and food. He himself ruled in righteousness until he passed away to fare according to his deeds. His lesson ended, the master preached the truths, at the close whereof that brother won the fruit of the first path. And the all-knowing Buddha, having told the two stories, made the connection linking the two together, and identified the birth by saying, "The well-to-do brother was the water demon of those days, Ananda was Prince Sun, Sariputta Prince Moon, and I myself, the eldest brother, Prince Mahimsasa. The story of the wood-gathering maiden, the Katthahari Jataka. This story was told by the master while at Devadhamma about the story of Vannupatha, which will be found in the 12th book in the Bodhisala Jātaka. Tradition tells us that she was the daughter of Mahanama by a slave girl named Nagamunda, and that she afterwards became the consort of the king of Kosala. She conceived a son by the king, but the king, coming to know of her servile origin, degraded her from her rank and also degraded her son Vannupatha. Mother and son never came outside the palace. Hearing of this, the master at early dawn came to the palace, attended by 500 brethren, and, sitting down on the seat prepared for him, said, "Sire, where is Vannupatha?" Then the king told him what had happened. "Sire, whose daughter is Vannupatha?" "Mahanama's daughter, sir." "When she came away, to whom did she come as wife, sir?" "Sire, she is a king's daughter. To a king she is wed, and to a king she bore her son. Wherefore is that son not in authority over the realm which owns his father's sway?" In bygone days, a monarch who had a son by a casual faggot gatherer gave that son his sovereignty. The king asked the Blessed One to explain this. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed from him by rebirth. Once on a time in Benares, Brahmadatta the king, having gone in great state to his pleasaunce, was roaming about looking for fruits and flowers, when he came on a woman who was merrily singing away as she picked up sticks in the grove. Falling in love at first sight, the king became intimate with her, and the Bodhisattva was conceived then and there. Feeling as heavy within as though weighed down with the bolt of Indra, the woman knew that she would become a mother, and told the king so. He gave her the signet ring from his finger and dismissed her with these words, "If it be a girl, spend this ring on her nurture, but if it be a boy, bring ring and child to me." When the woman's time was come, she bore the Bodhisattva, and when he could run about and was playing in the playground, a cry would arise, "No father has hit me." Hearing this, the Bodhisattva ran away to his mother and asked who his father was. "You are the son of the king of Benares, my boy." "What proof of this is there, mother?" "My son, the king on leaving me gave me this signet ring and said, 'If it be a girl, spend this ring on her nurture, but if it be a boy, bring ring and child to me.' Why then don't you take me to my father, mother?" Seeing that the boy's mind was made up, she took him to the gate of the palace and bade their coming be announced to the king. Being summoned in, she entered and bowing before his majesty said, "This is your son, sire." The king knew well enough that this was the truth, but shame before all his court made him reply, "He is no son of mine. But here is your signet ring, sire, you will recognize that. Nor is this my signet ring." Then said the woman, "Sire, I have now no witness to prove my words, except to appeal to truth. Wherefore, if you be the father of my child, I pray that he may stay in mid-air, but if not, may he fall to earth and be killed." So saying, she seized the Bodhisattva by the foot and threw him up into the air. Seated cross-legged in mid-air, the Bodhisattva in sweet tones repeated this stanza to his father, declaring the truth. "Your son am I, great monarch. Rear me, sire." The king rears others, but much more his child. Hearing the Bodhisattva thus teach the truth to him from mid-air, the king stretched out his hands and cried, "Come to me, my boy. None but me shall rear and nurture you." 1,000 hands were stretched out to receive the Bodhisattva, but it was into the arms of the king and of no other that he descended. seating himself in the king's lap. The king made him viceroy and made his mother queen consort. At the death of the king his father, he came to the throne by the title of King Katthahari, the faggot bearer, and after ruling his realm righteously, passed away to fare according to his deserts. His lesson to the king of Kosala ended, and his two stories told, the master made the connection linking them both together, and identified the birth by saying, Mahamaya was the mother of those days. King Suddhodana was the father, and I myself, King Katthahari. The story of the desert, Vannupatha. Tradition says that, whilst the Buddha was dwelling at Savatthi, there came to Devadhamma a scion of a Savatthi family, who, on hearing a discourse by the master, realized that lusts breed suffering, and was admitted to the first stage of the brotherhood. After 5 years passed in preparing for admission to full brotherhood, when he had learnt 2 summaries and had trained himself in the methods of insight, he obtained from the master a theme for meditation which commended itself to him. Retiring to a forest, he passed there the rainy season, but for all his striving during the 3 months, he could not develop a glimmer or an inkling of insight. So the thought came to him. The master said there were 4 types of men, and I must belong to the lowest of all. In this birth, methinks, there is neither path nor fruit for me. What good shall I do by living in the forest? Back to the master I will go, and live my life beholding the glories of the Buddha's presence and listening to his sweet teachings. And back again to Devadhamma he came. Now his friends and intimates said, Sir, it was you who obtained from the master a theme for meditation and departed to live the solitary life of a sage. Yet here you are back again, going about enjoying fellowship. Can it be that you have won the crown of the brother's vocation and that you will never know rebirth? Sirs, as I won neither path nor fruit, I felt myself doomed to futility, and so gave up persevering and came back. You have done wrong, sir, in showing a faint heart when you had devoted yourself to the doctrine of the dauntless master. Come, let us bring you to the Buddha's notice. And they took him with them to the master. When the master became aware of their coming, he said, Brethren, you bring with you this brother against his will. What has he done? Sir, after devoting himself to so absolutely true a doctrine, this brother has given up persevering in the solitary life of a sage and has come back. Then said the master to him, Is it true, as they say, that you, brother, have given up persevering? It is true, blessed one. But how comes it that, after devoting yourself to such a doctrine, you, brother, should be the one to show yourself not a man desiring little, contented, solitary, and determined, but a man lacking perseverance? Was it not you who were so stout-hearted in bygone days? Was it not by you single-handed, thanks to your perseverance, that in a sandy desert the men and the oxen belonging to a caravan of 500 carts got water and were cheered? And how is it that, now, you are giving in? These words suffice to give heart to that brother. Hearing this talk, the brethren asked the Blessed One, saying, Sir, the present faint-heartedness of this brother is clear to us, but hidden from us is the knowledge of how, by the perseverance of this single man, the men and oxen got water in a sandy desert and were cheered. This is known only to you who are omniscient. Pray tell us about it. Hearken then, brethren, said the Blessed One, and, having excited their attention, he made clear the thing that rebirth had concealed from them. Once on a time when Brahmadatta was king in Benares in Kasi, the Bodhisattva was born into a trader's family. When he was grown up, he used to travel about trading with 500 carts. On one occasion, he came to a sandy wilderness 60 leagues across, the sand of which was so fine that, when grasped, it slipped through the fingers of the closed fist. as soon as the sun got up, it grew as hot as a bed of charcoal embers, and nobody could walk upon it. Accordingly, those traversing it used to take firewood, water, oil, rice, and so forth on their carts, and only traveled by night. At dawn, they used to range their carts in a circle to form a laager with an awning spread overhead, and after an early meal used to sit in the shade all the day long. When the sun went down, they had their evening meal. And, so soon as the ground became cool, they used to yoke their carts and move forward. Traveling on this desert was like voyaging over the sea. A desert pilot, as he was called, had to convoy them over by knowledge of the stars. And this was the way in which our merchant was now traveling that wilderness. When he had only some 7 more miles before him, he thought to himself, "Tonight will see us out of this sandy wilderness." So, after they had had their supper, he ordered the wood and water to be thrown away, and yoking his carts, set out on the road. In the front cart sat the pilot upon a couch looking up to the stars in the heavens and directing the course thereby. But so long had he been without sleep that he was tired out and fell asleep, with the result that he did not mark that the oxen had turned round and were retracing their steps. All night the oxen kept on their way, but at dawn the pilot woke up and, observing the disposition of the stars overhead, shouted out, "Turn the carts round! Turn the carts round!" And as they turned the carts round and were forming them into line, the day broke. "Why, this is where we camped yesterday," cried the people of the caravan. "All our wood and water is gone, and we are lost." So saying, they unyoked their carts and made a laager and spread the awning overhead. Then each man flung himself down in despair beneath his own cart. Thought the Bodhisattva to himself, "If I give in, every single one will perish." So he ranged to and fro while it was still early and cool, until he came on a clump of kusa grass. "This grass," thought he, "can only have grown up here thanks to the presence of water underneath." So he ordered a spade to be brought and a hole to be dug at that spot. 60 cubits down they dug, till at that depth the spade struck on a rock, and everybody lost heart. But the Bodhisattva, feeling sure there must be water under that rock, descended into the hole and took his stand upon the rock. Stooping down, he applied his ear to it and listened. Catching the sound of water flowing beneath, he came out and said to a serving lad, "My boy, if you give in, we shall all perish. So take heart and courage. Go down into the hole with this iron sledgehammer and strike the rock." Obedient to his master's bidding, the lad, resolute where all others had lost heart, went down and struck the rock. The rock which had dammed the stream split asunder and fell in. Up rose the water in the hole till it was as high as a palm tree, and everybody drank and bathed. Then they chopped up their spare axles and yokes and other surplus gear, cooked their rice and ate it, and fed their oxen. And as soon as the sun set, they hoisted a flag by the side of the well and traveled on to their destination. There they bartered away their goods for 2 and 4 times their value. With the proceeds they returned to their own home, where they lived out their term of life, and in the end passed away to fare thereafter according to their deserts. The Bodhisattva too, after a life spent in charity and other good works, passed away likewise to fare according to his deserts. When the Supreme Buddha had delivered this discourse, he, the all-knowing one himself, uttered this stanza: "Untiring, deep they dug that sandy track, till in the trodden way they water found. So let the sage, in perseverance strong, flag not nor tire until his heart find peace." This discourse ended, he preached the 4 truths, at the close whereof the faint-hearted brother was established in the highest fruit of all, which is arahatship. Having told these 2 stories, the master established the connection linking them both together, and identified the birth by saying, "This faint-hearted brother of today was in those days the serving lad who, persevering, broke the rock and gave water to all the people." The Buddha's followers were the rest of the people of the caravan, and I myself was their leader. The story of the golden plate, Serivanija Jātaka. Once on a time in the kingdom of Seri, 5 aeons ago, the Bodhisattva dealt in pots and pans and was called the Serivan. In the company of another dealer in the same wares, a greedy fellow who was also known as the Serivan, he came across the river Cullaka and entered the city of Vannupatha. Apportioning the streets between the two of them, he set about hawking his wares round the streets of his district, and the other did the same in his district. Now, in that city, there was a decayed family. Once they had been rich merchants, but by the time of our story they had lost all the sons and brothers and all their wealth. The sole survivors were a girl and her grandmother, and they got their living by working for hire. Nevertheless, they had got in their house the golden bowl, out of which in the old days the great merchant, the head of the family, used to eat. But it had been thrown among the pots and pans, and having been long out of use, was grimed over with dirt, so that the two women did not know that it was gold. To the door of their house came the greedy hawker on his round, crying, "Water pots to sell, water pots to sell." And the damsel, when she knew he was there, said to her grandmother, "Oh, do buy me a trinket, grandmother. We're very poor, dear. What can we offer in exchange for it? Why, here's this bowl which is no good to us. Let us change that for it." The old woman had the hawker brought in and seated, and gave him the bowl, saying, "Take this, sir, and be so good as to give your sister something or other in exchange." The hawker took the bowl in his hand, turned it over, and suspecting it was gold, scratched a line on the back of it with a needle, whereby he knew for certain that it was real gold. Then, thinking that he would get the pot without giving anything whatever for it to the women, he cried, "What's the value of this, pray? Why, it isn't worth half a farthing." And therewithal he threw the bowl on the ground, rose up from his seat, and left the house. Now, as it had been agreed between the two hawkers that the one might try the streets which the other had already been into, the Bodhisattva came into that same street and appeared at the door of the house, crying, "Water pots to sell." Once again the damsel made the same request of her grandmother, and the old woman replied, "My dear, the first hawker threw our bowl on the ground and flung out of the house. What have we got left to offer now?" "Oh, but that hawker was a harsh-spoken man, grandmother dear, whilst this one looks a nice man and speaks kindly. Very likely he would take it. Call him in then." So he came into the house, and they gave him a seat and put the bowl into his hands. Seeing that the bowl was gold, he said, "Mother, this howl is worth 100,000 pieces. I haven't its value with me." "Sir, the first hawker who came here said that it was not worth half a farthing, so he threw it to the ground and went away. It must have been the efficacy of your own goodness which has turned the bowl into gold. Take it, give us something or other for it, and go your way." At the time the Bodhisattva had 500 pieces of money and a stock worth as much more. The whole of this he gave to them, saying, "Let me retain my scales, my bag, and 8 pieces of money." And with their consent he took these with him, and departed with all speed to the riverside, where he gave his 8 coins to the boatman and jumped into the boat. Subsequently that greedy hawker had come back to the house and had asked them to bring out their bowl, saying he would give them something or other for it. But the old woman flew out at him with these words, "You made out that our golden bowl, which is worth 100,000 pieces, was not worth even a half farthing. But there came an upright hawker, your master I take it, who gave us 1,000 pieces for it and took the bowl away." Hereupon he exclaimed, He has robbed me of a golden bowl worth a full 100,000 pieces. He has caused me a terrible loss." An intense sorrow came upon him, so that he lost command over himself and became like one distraught. His money and goods he flung away at the door of the house. He threw off his upper and underclothes, and armed with the beam of his scales as a club, he tracked the Bodhisattva down to the riverside. Finding the latter already crossing, he shouted to the boatman to put back. But the Bodhisattva told him not to do so. As the other stood there gazing and gazing at the retreating Bodhisattva, intense sorrow seized upon him. His heart grew hot, blood gushed from his lips, and his heart cracked like the mud at the bottom of a tank which the sun has dried up. Through the hatred which he had contracted against the Bodhisattva, he perished then and there. This was the first time Devadatta conceived a grudge against the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva, after a life spent in charity and other good works, passed away to fare according to his deserts. And the other did the same in his district. When the Supreme Buddha had ended this lesson, he, the all-knowing one himself, uttered this stanza: "If in this faith you prove remiss and fail to win the goal whereto its teachings lead, then, like the hawker called the Serivan, full long you'll rue the prize your folly lost." After having thus delivered his discourse in such a way as to lead up to arahatship, the master expounded the four truths, at the close whereof the faint-hearted brother was established in that highest fruit of all, which is arahatship. And after telling the two stories, the master made the connection linking them both together, and identified the birth by saying in conclusion, "In those days Devadatta was the foolish hawker, and I myself was the wise and good hawker." The story of the auspicious deer, Lakkhana Jataka. This story was told by the master in the bamboo grove near Rajagaha about Devadatta. The story of Devadatta will be related up to the date of the Abhimara employment in the Kandhala Jataka, up to the date of his dismissal from the office of treasurer in the Jataka, and up to the date of his being swallowed up by the earth in the 16th book in the Samuddavanija Jataka. For, on the occasion now in question, through failing to carry the 5 points which he had pressed for, had made a schism in the brotherhood and had gone off with 500 brethren to dwell at Gayasisa. Now, these brethren came to a riper knowledge, and the master, knowing this, called the 2 chief disciples and said, "Sariputta, your 500 pupils, who were perverted by Devadatta's teaching and went off with him, have now come to a riper knowledge. Go thither with a number of the brethren, preach the truth to them, enlighten these wanderers respecting the paths and the fruits, and bring them back with you." They went thither, preached the truth, enlightened them respecting the paths and the fruits, and next day at dawn came back again with those brethren to the bamboo grove. And whilst Sariputta was standing there after saluting the Blessed One on his return, the brethren spoke thus to him in praise of the elder Sariputta: "Sir, very bright was the glory of our elder brother, the captain of the truth, as he returned with a following of 500 brethren, whereas Devadatta has lost all his following. This is not the only time, brethren, when glory has been Sariputta's on his return with a following of his kinsfolk, like glory was his too in bygone days. So too, this is not the only time when Devadatta has lost his following. He lost it also in bygone days." The brethren asked the Blessed One to explain this to them. The Blessed One made clear what had been concealed by rebirth. Once on a time in the city of Rajagaha, in the kingdom of Magadha, there ruled a certain king of Magadha, in whose days the Bodhisattva came to life as a stag. Growing up, he dwelt in the forest as the leader of a herd of 1,000 deer. He had 2 young ones named Lucky and Blacky. When he grew old, he handed his charge over to his 2 sons, placing 500 deer under the care of each of them. And so now, these 2 young stags were in charge of the herd. Towards harvest time in Magadha, when the crops stand thick in the fields, it is dangerous for the deer in the forests round. Anxious to kill the creatures that devour their crops, the peasants dig pitfalls, fix stakes, set stone traps, and plant snares and other gins, so that many deer are slain. Accordingly, when the Bodhisattva marked that it was crop time, he sent for his 2 sons and said to them, "My children, it is now the time when crops stand thick in the fields, and many deer meet their death at this season. We who are old will make shift to stay in one spot, but you will retire each with your herd to the mountainous tracts in the forest and come back when the crops have been carried." "Very good," said his 2 sons, and departed with their herds, as their father bade. Now, the men who live along the route know quite well the times at which deer take to the hills and return thence. And lying in wait in hiding places here and there along the route, they shoot and kill numbers of them. The dullard Blacky, ignorant of the times to travel and the times to halt, kept his deer on the march early and late, both at dawn and in the gloaming, approaching the very confines of the villages, and the peasants, in ambush or in the open, destroyed numbers of his herd. Having thus by his crass folly worked the destruction of all these, it was with a very few survivors that he reached the forest. Lucky, on the other hand, being wise and astute and full of resource, never so much as approached the confines of a village. He did not travel by day, or even in the dawn or gloaming. Only in the dead of night did he move, and the result was that he reached the forest without losing a single head of his deer. 4 months they stayed in the forest, not leaving the hills till the crops were carried. On the homeward way, Blacky, by repeating his former folly, lost the rest of his herd and returned solitary and alone. Whereas Lucky had not lost one of his herd, but had brought back the whole 500 deer when he appeared before his parents. As he saw his 2 sons returning, the Bodhisattva framed this stanza in concert with the herd of deer. The upright kindly man bath his reward. Mark Lucky leading back his troop of kin, while here comes Blacky, shorn of all his herd. Such was the Bodhisattva's welcome to his son, and after living to a good old age, he passed away to fare according to his deserts. At the close of his lesson, when the master had repeated that Sariputta's glory and Devadatta's loss had both had a parallel in bygone days, he shewed the connection linking the 2 stories together and identified the birth by saying, Devadatta was the Blacky of those days, his followers were Blacky's following. Sariputta was the Lucky of those days, and his following the Buddha's followers. Rahula's mother was the mother of those days, and I myself was the father.